recorded so I can actually update this to the routine would not be the same if it was edited. Right, that too. Yeah. Yeah. And for those of you who listen to the routine, George Carlin's 7 filthy words routine, it is, I mean, and you know, obviously indecent is subjective to a certain extent, but it's to me, it isn't too offensive because it's almost like an English lesson. It's almost as if he is taking each of those 7 words one by one, and you know, he's not using them as an insult. He's not calling anyone in the audience these words. It's almost like a high school grammar teacher telling you the etymology, the word origin of several words. And you know, he also talks about how when we say certain words in a tone of voice, if we put aggression behind it, then that helps make it a quote unquote bad word. So really, you know, it's to me, it's never been that offensive a routine because he's not using these terms as insults or as direct attacks toward anyone. But again, this gentleman and his young son were driving around and they heard this routine unedited and complained, and the FCC got involved. And Pacifica, the company that owns this particular New York radio station, fought the FCC, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court came down in favor of the FCC and said the FCC has the power to regulate the public, and again, the public airwaves, the public radio airwaves, the public TV waves. It's because those public waves are there to serve the common good of the public. And the fact that part of Pacifica's defense was, well, if the guy didn't like it, why did he keep listening to it? And the court had an explanation for that. So they censured Pacifica. Pacifica sued. The Supreme Court upheld the FCC's ruling. And the Supreme Court said the FCC is well within its rights to censure, to fine, to revoke licenses, to refuse to renew licenses, because media, and especially radio, at that time, again, this was the early 70s, especially radio, is uniquely pervasive. In other words, it is everywhere, it's difficult to avoid. Because you don't even have to be sitting in your own car. You could be standing on a sidewalk and a car pulls up to you and stops at a red light and they have their windows down and the radio station is playing Carlin's routine. And you're just a young 11 or 12-year-old kid standing there with your parents and you hear these words coming out of this car that doesn't even belong to you, right? So they said radio is pretty unavoidable. And you don't even have to be in your car. You could be in an office, in a, you know, wherever your workplace or a doctor's office or any other place where a bunch of folks with different tastes and different definitions of standards could congregate. So radio is everywhere, at least it was in the early 70s, and it is difficult to avoid. And also, broadcasting, including radio, including TV, uniquely accessible to children. It doesn't take a lot of skill to turn on a radio or turn on a TV. In fact, thinking back, that's probably the first thing I learned how to do was turn on a television, even before I could write or speak. Certainly do math problems.
That's interesting that they use that language for radio and TV.
Say that again, you're coming in a little bit Low.
It's interesting that they would use that language about uniquely accessible to children, because no one's going to make that same argument to the internet that it should be regulated in that way.
So no one would make the same argument today about the internet? Again,
Yeah, I mean, it's
your
even more
comments
unique.
are kind of broken. I don't know if it's the speakers in here or your audio. Would they make the same argument about today's media? That's an interesting question. Well, I don't know. I don't have kids, so I don't have to worry about blocking things on the internet, but can you still block your kids from accessing certain sites on the web?
I mean, there's some software that you can, but
Yeah.
as far as like regulating the content through like an FCC, they're not going to use the same language, because it's even harder to regulate it. So that whole argument is
No,
just,
there's still very much a Wild West kind of format with the web. I couldn't tell you what years it was popular, but I do remember something about television, probably in the 90s, called the V chip, where the parents could control what channels could block certain channels at certain times, and then once the kids went to bed, unblock those channels. What's that?
There are definitely like parental controls that you can put on, especially on things like YouTube and stuff. But I mean, there are then also, like, I know that it was maybe a year or two ago on like YouTube Kids, some people were getting away with putting like really kind of pervasive stuff on the children's channels and kind of hiding it behind like animated stuff.
Yeah.
So I know that you can't always protect your kids from seeing that when like people get around it themselves.
Yeah, as I have found out in the past 6 months, since I've gotten used to uploading lectures to YouTube, is one of the first things that YouTube asks you if you are uploading a video to your own channel is this made for kids? And I would like to think my lectures are made for people of all ages, but I still check no, it's not made for kids. I just feel like it's easier to upload something that way. Yeah.
But I've like been babysitting and like get on that one to put on a show for the kids, and there's some stuff that like I watch on there. So I don't think they're very secure and like check it very often. There's shows that like I would watch, like a movie that has like I don't know, like a shark attack in it.
Yeah.
And it's a like educational show, but I wouldn't want a 6-year-old watching that because then they'd have nightmares.
Yeah, maybe I should do a little experiment. So the comment from the audience is, and this happens to me too, you get on Netflix or Hulu, and first thing it says is, who is watching, Mike or kids? I'm like, it's obviously me. Why is there even a kids option? So of course I always click on my own name, but maybe I should click on the kids thing just one of these times as kind of a research experiment and see what options are available and see what options are no longer available on Hulu and Netflix. But you know, I would imagine it's easy for a kid to get around. It's like the early stage of the internet, right? Where you had adult sites and you went to an adult site and said, are you 18 or over? And all you had to do was click yes. There was no kind of, there was no next screen that asked for any kind of further identification. So you know, these stop gaps are not, I don't think, are really work that well. I think they're more just to save certain companies from litigation, right? Did you try your best to keep kids away from this material? Yeah, we tried our best. We asked them if they were 18, and you know, if they were 14 and said they were 18, that's on them, not us. We tried. Let's see. We allowed to work on the review with peers? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yep, absolutely. So what did the FCC do, though, as part of this ruling? There was some good news for broadcasters. The FCC established what they call safe harbor hours, which meant that broadcasters could have a little bit more leeway from around 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. So perhaps they could show a movie that had a little bit of profanity or some very brief nudity in it. Something they would get fined for if they showed during the day, because obviously the thought process is that kids, impressionable kids, are going to be in bed between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. So, you know, if the adults want to stay up for a couple of hours and watch some, you know, more adult content, again, they couldn't put NC-17 material on between 10 and 6, but they could put more, you know, perhaps some R-rated movies on at that time. All right. Switching gears here to copyright protection. So, what is the difference between copyright and trademark? Copyright will protect more intangible material. So it protects the music, it protects the words in a book, it protects the movie, it protects the TV show. Trademarks are more for logos or symbols or jingles, something like that. So music has copyright protection. The Starbucks Mermaid, the McDonald's Golden Arches, those are trademarked. And of course, copyright, those are the regulations for who can record what, who can play what. And obviously, artists of all generations have done cover songs. In fact, sometimes an artist's biggest hit is a cover song, and sometimes that cover song is bigger than the original. But can you just cover a song on your own and record it and disseminate it without asking for permission? And that is a big no. Unless that particular artist who wrote the song has been deceased for 70 years. The Starbucks Mermaid, yeah. Yeah, Madeline. She's a mermaid. And I really don't know the connection. I don't know if mermaids like coffee, but I have no idea. But that's what she's supposed to be. She's a caffeinated mermaid. Well, wait till you get to be my age, Madeline. You'll realize how much of a lie that life really is. Yep. That's a downer way to spend a Friday. Life is nothing but a lie, folks. Let's just cancel class for the rest of the semester. I mean, there's still Starbucks to get me through. I mean, I know life is a lie, but there's caffeine that keeps me going. So that's the good thing. That's the silver lining. So yeah, unless the songwriter has been passed away for 70 years, you would have to get permission. And if a songwriter is no longer living, you would have to get permission from their estate, whoever controls the back catalog of their music. So, trying to think of artists who have been gone for a while. Elvis died in 77, I believe, so he's been gone for 43 years. So you would still have to wait another 27, 28 years to record and disseminate an Elvis cover without calling, I'm assuming, his ex-wife Priscilla and getting her permission. Or maybe it's Lisa Marie, the daughter, who owns the rights. I don't know. But if you're in a cover band, you can do all the Mozart and Beethoven and Bach you want. They're not going to say anything. And that's different if it's an individual artist as opposed to a corporate copyright. So 120 years after creation for corporate copyrights, 95 years after publication. But if that's the case, if you have to wait 70 years after an artist passes away, after a songwriter passes away to cover their material, why are there so many cover bands around? Back when we were allowed to go to clubs and bars that had live music, you know, most bands in nightclubs and bars play cover songs. Then they'll say, okay, we're going to do an original here, and that's when everyone gets up to go to the bathroom or order another drink. Then they come back when they start playing cover songs again. So how does that happen? Well, it's kind of different for a live performance. These copyright protections, the life plus 70 years, generally speaking, we're talking about when an artist would record a song and sell that particular song, or put it on an album and sell that particular album to disseminate it. That doesn't mean, though, that cover bands at your local bar or nightclub don't have to pay in some way. In fact, the bands don't pay. It's the establishments that pay kind of a flat rate for any kind of licensing fee. Now that that fee may be taken out of whatever they pay the cover band for that particular night. But usually, generally speaking, an establishment that has live music will pay a flat kind of royalty fee because they obviously know that bands that perform at their establishments are going to play cover songs. But the reason it's a flat fee is obviously folks who own and manage nightclubs aren't going to ask a band to give them their set list 6 weeks in advance. And they're not going to have time to look to search for every songwriter of every song that a cover band is going to play. So it's just a flat fee to publishing companies, licensing companies. And that's what covers live music. We're still shocked it's a mermaid, huh? Upload a cover to Spotify and make money off of it as long as you don't change the original composition. That is a good question, Tyler. Upload a cover to Spotify as long as you don't change the... Usually changing the original composition is what gives you a little bit of leeway. I don't know. That's a good question. We'll check that out. And actually, here are the exceptions. So like I said, if you're a cover band and you want to rock out to Beethoven on a Friday night, you can do it. He's been dead a couple hundred years. And once that magical 70 years passes, then that music becomes part of what is called the public domain. And you might ask, well, why not just once the artist passes away? Well, certainly we're thinking about the artist's family as well. Kids and grandkids, so 70 years. 70 years is obviously an arbitrary number, but that's meant to cover not just the artist and their spouse, but also kids as well, and probably grandkids. Yeah.
What's the case within like
So the question from the audience is, what about the Beatles? 2 of the 4 Beatles are dead. You would have to look at the songwriter. Now, most of the Beatles songs were written by John Lennon and Paul McCartney in combination. Lennon's obviously been dead for about 40 years now. McCartney is still kicking, still going. Now, it would depend on, and I've heard some, I've listened to some interviews with Paul McCartney fairly recently, and at one point, he was trying to get more control over the songs that he wrote, because they decided, Lennon and McCartney at the beginning of the Beatles decided that, you know what, we're just going to form this partnership. And all of the songs that we write are going to say Lennon McCartney, even if McCartney wrote 95% of it and Lennon came in and said, hey, why don't you try this guitar chord instead of that one, and got a 5%. So at some point in the past decade, Paul McCartney was trying to gain more control and maybe get John Lennon's name taken off of some of the songs that Paul either wrote the vast majority of or wrote by himself, because sometimes if John or Paul would write a song by themselves in the Beatles years, they would still call it a Lennon and McCartney collaboration. So to answer your question, I don't know, because I still think a lot of that is tied up. And then the record company might own a lot of those rights too, because there was a time when Michael Jackson bought the Beatles library, which was odd, and then I think he sold it, or when Michael Jackson passed away, if those went back to Paul McCartney or went back to Apple Music. So that's kind of a confusing one, to be honest. But mostly we're talking songwriters here, and even in bands, there's a primary song. George Harrison, the other Beatle who's passed away, the George Harrison songs on Beatles albums were written by Harrison himself, and he's the only one credited for those songs. He hasn't been dead for more than, I guess it has been almost 20 years. I think it was 2001 when he passed. But again, it would be another 50 years before you could do anything with George Harrison's work. What's up with chat? Maroon 5 stole Pachelbel's canon? I did not know that. That's interesting. Right, if it's a classical piece, yeah. So Spotify has taken, and I think a lot of it, it's William and Tyler, I think a lot of it has to do with who finds out. It's kind of like violating a YouTube copyright, right? Actually, I tried to upload well, let me look at Michael Jackson here. J.K. Rowling didn't want to have anything to do with Michael Jackson. Doesn't surprise me. So I was giving a lecture, was recording a lecture in a different class last week, and in the middle of my lecture, and I guess I kind of forgot I was recording, I played a clip from the BBC that was on YouTube, a 5-minute clip. And the clip ran and it ended, and then I continued my lecture, and then I went to upload it a couple of days later to YouTube so I could post it on eCampus. And 30 minutes later, because they take forever to upload to YouTube sometimes, I got a message from YouTube saying that it had been blocked because of copyright from the BBC. And I thought, oh, God, I just should have stopped recording when I played that video. But I feel like that's kind of a newer thing that YouTube is doing now, is catching copyright infringement right off the bat. Where in the old days, and maybe like Spotify is going through this right now, it was YouTube didn't automatically catch a lot of copyright violations. So if you uploaded a video to YouTube and it had somebody's song in the background, or some other piece of copyrighted material, oftentimes, unless somebody saw it and reported it, then it stayed up for a while. And maybe that's what Spotify is going through right now. Oh, the 27 Club. Yeah, there are lots of 27. It seems to be or that's just the number that everybody focuses on. I mean, there are probably lots of rock stars out there who died at 29, but we just don't pay much attention to them because 27 is kind of that cool number. See, Peter, that's an interesting point because I am a guitar player as well, and I will go on YouTube to find videos of, yeah, exactly, some non-famous guitar player playing a solo from a Led Zeppelin song or something like that, and they are all over YouTube. And I don't know if it's because it's not the entire song, if it's just maybe, hey, here's how to play the solo to this song, or here's the chord progression to this particular song, and it's not the actual recording, it's just this guy playing it on his guitar. If that's where the lack of copyright violation, people will flag videos that are fair. So yeah, it's kind of like the FCC, right? The FCC doesn't get involved unless people complain to them. So YouTube doesn't go searching for copyright infringement unless people mark something, or unless I try to upload something. And technically, my lecture that I was trying to upload to YouTube so that I could post it on eCampus should have been under the fair use protection because it was used for teaching purposes. Now, of course, YouTube didn't know that. They just thought I was uploading a video that had a 5-minute BBC clip in the middle. They didn't know I was going to post it to eCampus. They probably don't know what eCampus is. But if I had just posted it directly to eCampus, it wouldn't have been a problem. So teaching, research, commentary, news reporting, and parody. And this is where you get as long as you're, the technical term is adding a new perspective to the original. And obviously that's what a parody of a song does. The music is often the same. It's often the same chord progressions and melody and pretty much identical to the original song, but the lyrics are different. And the lyrics are very obviously meant to be humorous. Which leads us to this guy. That guy has made a living, a very nice living, for, gosh, almost 40 years now of parodying famous people's music, such as Michael Jackson, as someone just mentioned. A lot of the 80s stars, Michael Jackson, Madonna, they all got the Weird Al treatment at some point. And I've read and watched many interviews with Weird Al, and just because Weird Al is a nice guy, and he tries to be friendly with folks in the music industry, he has asked either the artists themselves or their management, hey, can I parody this song? Now, Weird Al does not need to ask permission. Because again, he's recording a parody. But he says he does it just to be nice. And there have been, I guess there have been a few artists that said no, but one artist that always said no, with great frequency and disdain. In fact, Weird Al tells a story that one time he was seated next to this particular artist, or near this artist at I think it was the Grammy Awards or something like that, and the artist's bodyguard was sitting next to him and said, whatever you do, don't make eye contact with him. And that artist was the late, great Prince. Prince always turned down Weird Al, always said no. Probably never talked to Weird Al personally, probably just had his manager tell Weird Al no. So Prince was not a fan of Weird Al's music and never gave, now again, Weird Al could have done it anyway. Prince could have said no, and Weird Al could have said, well, you know what? Legally, I have the right, so I'm going to do it. But he never did, because he was not a fan of making enemies in the music industry. It's funny that it's a childhood flashback for you guys. It's a childhood flashback for me, too. That just shows you how long he's been around. That's, yeah, William, that's kind of true. And a lot of artists have said that. I mean, I think Kurt Cobain said that when Weird Al turned Smells Like Teen Spirit into Smells Like Nirvana. I think Kurt Cobain said, you know what, I feel like we finally arrived. And I know the story because I think both Weird Al and obviously before he died, Kurt Cobain told the same story, that he and Kurt actually talked on the phone. So Al didn't even have to go through any managers. He just got in touch with Kurt Cobain himself and they chatted on the phone, and Kurt asked him what he was going to do to Teen Spirit, and Weird Al told him, and Kurt said, you know what, that's hysterical. Yeah, do it. Or you have my blessing, even though Weird Al didn't need his blessing. But obviously we're in a very different era now, where we have a lot more interactive media, a lot more sampling, a lot more mashups, a lot more peer-to-peer sharing. And a lot of those legal issues are still trying to be ironed out, but one particular movement called the Creative Commons movement has let artists, older artists and newer artists, kind of work out an agreement that works best for both. So today, some artists might give up some of their copyright protection and let newer and younger artists sample their work or cover their work. So why would an original artist give up some of their copyright protection? Well, if they're older, I mean, think about this. Your music gets exposed to a new audience. If you've been around for 30 or 40 years, and I'm sure I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but I'm sure somebody out there in chat land can think of a recent cover that brought the original artists back into the spotlight. Maybe we'd all forgotten about that original artist. But original artists will give up part of their, some of their copyright protection in this Creative Commons movement because they know that if a young hip artist reworks their song or covers their song, it can bring attention back on them. And it can increase album sales for them. And maybe jumpstart their career a little bit. Eminem sampled Dream On? Yeah. Didn't know that. Yeah, and Aerosmith, they're still around, technically. They don't look so well. They probably need to stop. And according to YouTube, they don't play so well anymore either. But, they're all right around 70. But I would imagine Steven Tyler and the boys don't mind being exposed to a new audience. Of course, Eminem's been around now for 20 years at least. So his target audience is probably more my age or a little bit younger. Miley Cyrus with Jolene. Yeah. I don't think Dolly's ever lost popularity though. I think she's one of those amazing artists who just. Is Dolly Miley Cyrus's godmother? Really? Okay. Huh. Does Billy Ray know this? Okay. They have his blessing? According to Google, Dolly Parton is Miley Cyrus's godmother. Wow. That's... I love the fact that I keep learning new things.
and I was like, why would somebody of that, like, stardom spend the time on a cheesy Disney Channel show?
Yeah.
Like, they just were like, hey, come be on your goddaughter show.
I had no idea. Huh. Well, you know, you all are too young to remember it, but there were a couple of years in the early 90s when, for better or for worse, Billy Ray Cyrus was the biggest name in country music. So he probably could have asked for just about any favor, such as asking Dolly to be the godmother for Miley. Yeah, that mullet was strong. Yeah, good. So we have a question from the audience. Can someone in chat resend that group me link? Thank you very much. So last thing we'll talk about, and there are a couple more slides that we'll chat about first thing Monday before we start reviewing. So regulations on ownership, and I've talked about this before a little bit, especially Sinclair. The ownership rules have been eased over the past few years. They used to be much more strict. Ownership groups could only own a small percentage of TV stations or radio stations or newspapers or any media, really. And in the past decade or two, a lot of radio stations, and you know, I don't know how many of you folks still listen to regular radio anymore, but you might notice that no matter where you travel in this country, there is oftentimes a radio station that is advertised as a format everyone's favorite or something like that. And the DJs all sound the same and the music they play is all the same. And I think one of them was called Kiss FM. It seems like every city I traveled to, whether it was in the Midwest where I'm from or the South where I went to school or traveling back to the Northeast where I used to live, every medium-sized or major city had a Kiss FM, and it had nothing to do with the band Kiss. It was just, that was their way of promoting it. And it was all kind of 80s soft rock. All the DJs sounded the same, and it maybe had been because it was the same DJ. It was just kind of a nationally broadcast radio station that, excuse me, that went out to local markets. And that was Clear Channel. So kind of the danger, and you know, it's not, I don't know if danger is the right word, but you get a lot of formulaic radio and same songs and same kind of formatting, same kind of presentation from these channels that are owned by the big ownership companies like Clear Channel and like Sinclair for television. And I've discussed Sinclair a little bit already this semester, and that they own several hundred TV stations, local TV stations around the country. And they've gotten in a little bit of hot water fairly recently for having their local news anchors talk about how we're the only, you know, you must watch our station because we're the only fair news station in town, and there's a lot of fake news and a lot of fake media out there. And that rubbed a lot of non-Sinclair stations the wrong way. They're like, look, we're all for competition, and we understand that local news stations compete with one another, but that's hitting below the belt there, talking about how there's a lot of fake media out there and we're the only ones you can trust. You know, basically calling news stations that weren't owned by Sinclair or accusing them of making up the news or falsifying the news. And Sinclair got into some trouble for that, but they're a very powerful company, as is Clear Channel. And you know, the concern is that if so many stations around the country are owned by the same ownership group, are these stations now lacking variety? Are these stations now peddling the same kind of message? All right, what time is it? It's time to go. So like I said, we got a couple more. Pittsburgh had KISS FM. Yeah, that maybe, yeah, because I lived in Morgantown, West Virginia for 3 years before I moved here, and we got a lot of Pittsburgh stations, so that may have been where I last heard it. KISS FM, yeah, yeah, and it's KISS FM in Dallas, LA, it's all, yeah, it's top 40s, mostly from the 80s and 90s. And, you know, it's the same stuff. It's the same music, but it's the music everyone can agree on because everyone hates it equally, I would assume. That's why we can all agree on it. All right, folks, have a good weekend. We'll chat a little bit more about this chapter on Monday, but then we'll do a review. So come with some questions on Monday from the study guide.
Take care.
Thank you.